An explosive confrontation behind the closed doors of Buckingham Palace just shattered the royal family's unified public front. Queen Camilla directly violated court protocol yesterday morning, launching a stunning verbal attack against Princess Anne right in front of the assembled senior household staff. Nobody expected King Charles to take such drastic, immediate action. But when the details of the humiliation were brought to his desk, the king completely lost control, issuing an unprecedented ultimatum that has left the entire palace hierarchy in absolute chaos. The morning briefing room standoff. Princess Anne sat at the head of the long, mahogany conference table inside the Buckingham Palace briefing room at exactly 9 o'clock on a chilly Monday morning. She wore a sharp tweed jacket and had 3 thick leather folders open in front of her. Surrounding the table were 12 senior household staff members, including the master of the household and the director of the Royal Travel Office. The meeting was a routine weekly session designed to finalize the logistics for the upcoming autumn charity calendar. Anne tapped her fountain pen against the edge of a typed spreadsheet. She was in the middle of instructing the logistics director to allocate a specific helicopter transit window for an upcoming visit to a sailors' charity in the north of Scotland. The director nodded, preparing to log the command into the Central Palace database. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the briefing room swung open, hitting the decorative brass wall stoppers with a loud, metallic clang. Queen Camilla walked into the room, accompanied by her private secretary and a personal protection officer. She did not take a seat at the table. She walked directly to the opposite end of the mahogany board, dropping a stack of glossy media schedules onto the polished wood. She looked straight across the room at the king's sister. Camilla stated that the helicopter transit window for Scotland was being reassigned to her own office for a high-profile fashion charity event in London. The administrative facts of the palace scheduling system outline a rigid traditional chain of command. Under the historic rules established by Queen Elizabeth, the Princess Royal operates with a high degree of autonomy. Her schedule is traditionally locked into the system 6 months in advance to ensure maximum efficiency. The Queen Consort holds the ultimate ceremonial rank among the women of the court, but she does not possess the direct constitutional authority to arbitrarily dismantle the logistical arrangements of other working royals without the explicit signature of the king. Anne did not raise her voice. She looked down at her spreadsheet and stated that her Scottish engagement had been confirmed by the Cabinet Office 3 months earlier. She added that canceling the transit window now would insult hundreds of Merchant Navy veterans who were expecting a royal representative. Camilla stepped closer to the table, leaning her hands on the back of an empty chair. She told the assembled staff members to ignore the Princess Royal's directives and adjust the database entries immediately to favor her London schedule. The tension inside the briefing room reached an absolute breaking point when Camilla delivered her next observation. She looked directly at Anne's open folders and made a direct, highly personal comment about her traditional wardrobe and her approach to public duties. The insult was so blunt that 2 senior military aides standing near the window instantly picked up their clipboards and quietly exited the room through the side staff door, refusing to be witnesses to a direct domestic confrontation between the highest-ranking women in the building. The staff members who remained at the table sat in complete, frozen silence. The master of the household stared straight ahead at his monitor, completely unwilling to make eye contact with either the queen or the princess. The weekly briefing had transformed from a standard administrative workshop into an unprecedented operational showdown. Camilla finished her statement, turned on her heel, and walked out of the room, leaving her glossy media schedules scattered across the end of the mahogany table. This explosive standoff introduces an intense structural mystery into the heart of the current reign. Why did Camilla choose a public administrative meeting filled with senior household staff to launch such an aggressive challenge against the king's sister? The answer rests on a long-standing dispute regarding the distribution of the crown's private transportation assets. Over the past year, King Charles has aggressively cut down the palace travel budget, reducing the number of active helicopters and private aircraft available to the family to save money and present a leaner image to the public. This fiscal squeeze has created intense internal competition for resources between the different royal offices. Camilla's team has consistently pushed for more visual, media-friendly appearances in major urban centers, which require rapid transit logistics to navigate tight schedules. Anne, by contrast, relies on steady traditional long-distance travel to reach remote communities across the United Kingdom. Camilla viewed the allocation of the Scottish transit window as an unacceptable priority for a peripheral event, and she used the morning briefing to test the boundaries of her sovereign status in front of the household bureaucracy. The news of the briefing room altercation began spreading through the internal palace network within 15 minutes of the doors closing. Clerks and administrative assistants were quietly sending messages between desks, trying to verify if the Princess Royal had capitulated to the Queen's demands. The facts emerged when Anne's private driver was seen pulling her car up to the front entrance of the courtyard. Anne did not attempt to argue with the travel directors or launch a counter-complaint with the palace administrators. She packed her leather folders into her briefcase, walked down the grand staircase, and left the building to proceed with her scheduled afternoon engagements via the public train network. The mystery now shifts directly to the king's private apartments at Clarence House, where the master of the household was preparing to deliver a full transcript of the morning event to Charles's desk. The king's personal staff understood that this public humiliation of Princess Anne could not be brushed aside as a simple family disagreement. The quiet rebellion among the staff was already gathering momentum, and the king was about to face a direct administrative crisis that would force him to choose between the absolute loyalty of his sister and the public standing of his wife. The hardest-working royal refuses to back down. Princess Anne walked onto the tarmac at the Aberdeen airport at 2 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon. The rain was coming down in sheets, blowing sideways against the metal steps of a commercial turboprop aircraft. She carried her own umbrella and a heavy leather document bag. No royal welcoming committee stood on the runway. Only a local station manager stood by the baggage cart, tipping his hat as the princess walked toward a rented saloon car waiting near the security hangar. The factual record of Anne's public service provides a stark contrast to the modern celebrity culture of the current court. For over 5 decades, the Princess Royal has consistently dominated the pages of the official court circular, the daily logbook that tracks every single public duty performed by the royal family. In the previous calendar year alone, Anne completed exactly 457 official engagements. She traveled to remote islands, opened community hospitals, and met with local agricultural committees, often completing 3 separate events in a single day without any national press coverage. This grueling schedule is managed with a level of extreme fiscal discipline that sets her apart from every other senior member of the family. Anne does not travel with a massive entourage of personal stylists, makeup artists, and public relations directors. Her typical traveling team consists of a single lady-in-waiting and 2 protection officers from the Metropolitan Police. She has famously worn the exact same tailored wool coats and formal dresses for 30 years, frequently ordering her personal dressmaker to alter her existing wardrobe rather than purchasing new garments from luxury design houses in London. The tension over this traditional approach to royal duty forms the core ideological rift between the king's sister and the queen consort. Camilla's office operates with a completely different philosophy. Her team focuses heavily on high-visibility, media-friendly events that generate maximum impact on social media platforms and fashion publications. They prioritize appearances at major cultural festivals, high-end charity galas, and literary luncheons in the south of England. Camilla's advisors argue that this modern, visual approach is essential to keep the monarchy relatable to a younger demographic that has little interest in traditional agricultural shows or industrial openings. Anne viewed this modern media strategy as a dangerous dilution of the crown's true purpose. She often stated to her personal staff that the monarchy survives because it represents stable, unflashy public service, not temporary celebrity status. This deep friction explains why she refused to engage in a public shouting match when Camilla confronted her in the briefing room. In Anne's view, arguing over helicopter transit windows in front of the palace household bureaucracy would be a direct betrayal of the professional standards her mother, Queen Elizabeth, maintained for 70 years. This brings us to a compelling administrative mystery that caught the palace travel office completely by surprise later that evening. When the travel directors reviewed the central computer database at 6 o'clock, they discovered that Anne's team had not attempted to launch a formal counterclaim to reclaim the disputed helicopter. They had simply clicked the deletion box, canceling the flight plan entirely. The mystery was how the Princess Royal intended to reach 4 distinct charitable facilities spread across the remote corners of the Scottish Highlands within a 48-hour window, without any access to private aviation assets. The answer emerged when the local station manager at Aberdeen confirmed that Anne's office had quietly booked standard first-class tickets on the local railway line weeks in advance as a backup measure. She had anticipated that her brother's new administrative reforms would create a logistical bottleneck, and she took independent steps to ensure her schedule remained bulletproof. By boarding a public train alongside regular commuters, she delivered a powerful, silent critique of the Queen's reliance on high-cost private transport assets. The visual impact of this quiet defiance became immediately apparent to the public. A passenger sitting in the third row of the train carriage used his mobile phone to take a photograph of the Princess Royal, reviewing her estate folders while sitting next to a standard window seat. The image was uploaded to an internet forum at 7:30, accumulating hundreds of thousands of views within an hour. The public comments were overwhelmingly positive, with regular taxpayers praising the King's sister for her down-to-earth dedication and her willingness to save public funds during a difficult economic period for the country. This wave of public approval injected an intense wave of fresh tension back into the administrative offices at Buckingham Palace. Camilla's media directors realized that their tactical victory in the briefing room had completely backfired on them in the court of public opinion. The Queen's upcoming fashion charity event in London was now being framed by the media as an unnecessary luxury, contrasted sharply with the image of Princess Anne traveling through the driving rain on a public train to fulfill her promises to Merchant Navy veterans. Anne remained completely unbothered by the media storm as her car pulled up to a modest hotel near Inverness late that evening. She checked into her room, declined the manager's offer of a special private dining suite, and ate a simple dinner while reading her briefing papers for the next morning. She had played her hand with the cold, professional precision of a seasoned constitutional operative, proving that true royal power is not derived from ceremonial rank or the possession of private helicopters, but from an unbreakable commitment to the people who fund the crown. The broken teacup in the King's private study. King Charles stood by the desk in his private study at Clarence House at 4 o'clock on Monday afternoon. The room smelled of old leather and beeswax. He held a small antique porcelain teacup painted with gold leaves. The master of the household stood 3 feet away, holding a thin black audio recorder. The courtier pushed a small silver button on the device. A clear voice filled the room, repeating the exact words Queen Camilla had spoken in the briefing room 5 hours earlier. The king's hand shook slightly as the recording finished playing. He turned around too quickly to place the teacup down on the mahogany blotter. His sleeve caught the delicate handle, and the porcelain cup slid off the edge. It struck the brass leg of the desk, breaking into 5 jagged pieces on the green wool carpet. A small pool of Earl Grey tea sank rapidly into the fabric. Charles did not call for a footman to clean the mess. He stood looking down at the fragments. The internal operational facts of the palace household explain the gravity of this moment. The king relies entirely on his sister to maintain order within the domestic staff. Princess Anne has managed the royal estates and internal security committees for 30 years. Her authority among the permanent staff members is absolute. Bypassing her commands in front of junior clerks breaks the administrative structure of the entire building. Charles had spent his whole life trying to avoid open domestic conflict between his wife and his siblings. The confrontation between the 2 senior women created an immediate constitutional problem. Under the rules of the royal household regulations, any direct dispute regarding the allocation of crown transport must be settled by a formal panel. The panel consists of the king's private secretary and the permanent secretary to the treasury. Camilla's sudden intervention bypassed this entire legal mechanism. She used her ceremonial rank as queen consort to execute an unvouched command, forcing the travel office to act without a signed royal warrant. The tension in the study escalated when the master of the household handed the king a copy of the official court circular for the upcoming autumn season. The logbook showed that Anne had already committed to 60 distinct public charity engagements across Wales and northern England over the next 30 days. If her transport windows were consistently intercepted by Camilla's media team, the Princess Royal would miss 20% of her scheduled commitments. This would create a massive public relations disaster for the crown, as hundreds of local communities would face sudden, unexplained cancellations. This structural logjam introduces a profound mystery regarding the king's next administrative choice. How can a reigning sovereign punish his own wife for an insubordinate action without exposing the internal divisions of his marriage to the national media? Charles resolved this system threat by invoking an old, rarely used protocol from the 1937 Civil List Act. The statute allows the monarch to issue a confidential operational restriction order against any member of the royal family who holds an allowance through the sovereign grant. The legal facts of the 1937 protocol are incredibly specific. It grants the king the absolute authority to lock the private diary and wardrobe allocations of his spouse if her public actions cause a direct disruption to the state's administrative workflow. The restriction order does not require the approval of the Privy Council or Parliament. It is a private household directive signed by the sovereign's own hand. Charles picked up a black fountain pen from his desk tray and began drafting the initial terms of the restriction order on a piece of cream paper. The financial data regarding Camilla's upcoming fashion event in London supported this harsh response. The event was projected to cost the palace travel budget over £40,000 in short-term transport modifications and private security deployments. By signing the restriction order, Charles could officially cancel the entire project without ever mentioning the briefing room altercation. He could frame the cancellation as a necessary measure of modern fiscal restraint, keeping the true nature of the family feud entirely hidden behind a wall of administrative policy. The private secretary returned to the study at 5 o'clock to collect the signed paperwork. The broken porcelain pieces had finally been swept away by a junior housemaid, leaving nothing but a faint dark stain on the green carpet. Charles handed the secretary the completed restriction order, commanding him to deliver it directly to Camilla's private office at Buckingham Palace via a secure courier. The king walked over to the window, looking out at the iron gates of the courtyard as the rain began to clear. The mystery now shifts directly to the reaction brewing inside Camilla's administrative apartments. The Queen Consort's media directors are about to receive a document that strips away her independent scheduling powers for the next 30 days. They will have to explain the sudden cancellation of her high-profile London fashion show to international designers without admitting that the king has officially placed his wife in a state of domestic exile. The battle lines have been drawn deeply within the palace walls, and the king's authority is facing its most volatile internal test. Why Anne holds the true loyalty of palace staff. A senior estate warden turned his key in the heavy padlock of the eastern storehouses at Windsor Castle at dawn on Tuesday. He wore the traditional dark green tweed uniform of the royal groundskeepers. Behind him, 2 assistant wardens began loading oak barricades and ceremonial flags onto the bed of an electric utility vehicle. The equipment was originally earmarked for a regional agricultural parade that Queen Camilla's media office had tried to postpone the previous evening. The wardens did not wait for a confirmation email from the Queen's secretary. They followed a laminated logbook bearing Princess Anne's personal signature from 3 weeks ago. The internal operational data across the royal residences reveals a massive network of loyalty that money cannot buy. The permanent palace staff numbers over 1,000 individuals across the United Kingdom. This includes chefs, security guards, stable hands, and land registry clerks. A high percentage of these workers have held their positions for over 25 years. They spent decades watching Princess Anne work closely alongside Queen Elizabeth. They remember her managing the complex logistics of the royal Maundy services and the annual garden parties with total, unflinchingly mechanical precision. Anne treats the household staff with a specific code of professional respect that is highly valued within the institution. She does not demand personal favors outside of working hours. She writes handwritten thank you notes to the kitchen staff after major state events. Most importantly, she defends the traditional workforce against the aggressive cost-cutting measures proposed by modern corporate advisors. When a London consultancy firm suggested downsizing the historic liveried staff to save £50,000, Anne blocked the proposal during a closed-door trustee meeting, funding the payroll deficit out of her own private estate accounts. The tension over this internal alignment became instantly visible to Camilla's public relations team on Tuesday morning. The Queen's secretary attempted to log an emergency vehicle request through the central transport pool computer, The request was denied by the automated system. A red warning banner on the screen stated that all active palace utility vehicles had been fully deployed to the northern estates under a standing order from the Princess Royal's office. The transport clerks refused to override the block, citing a traditional rule that prohibits the cancellation of active field missions already underway. Camilla found herself completely isolated within the physical structure of the building. Her ceremonial title of Queen Consort gives her a prominent public profile, but it does not buy the deep institutional loyalty of the workers who run the infrastructure. The chefs in the kitchen continued preparing the standard menus approved by the master of the household. The security details refused to adjust their gate rotations without a signed warrant from the palace police commander. The entire palace apparatus was executing a silent, flawless bureaucratic slowdown, completely freezing the Queen's independent initiatives without ever breaking a single written rule. This internal rebellion introduces a profound mystery regarding the true balance of power within the modern court. How can a junior princess successfully command the absolute loyalty of a 1,000-person workforce while the reigning queen consort is met with bureaucratic resistance? The mystery was resolved when Prince William intervened in the dispute from his private office at Adelaide Cottage. The Prince of Wales placed a secure telephone call to the palace transport pool at 10 o'clock. He did not issue a loud command. He simply stated that his office fully endorsed the administrative authority of his aunt, Princess Anne, regarding all logistics for the autumn season. The legal facts of the royal succession framework reinforce this alignment. William holds the absolute ownership of the Duchy of Cornwall, which funds a significant portion of the shared security and transport assets utilized by the family. By aligning his immense financial power with Anne's traditional administrative authority, the future king effectively built an unassailable wall around the palace workforce. He signaled to the entire household bureaucracy that the long-term survival of the monarchy belongs to the traditionalists who protect the institution's standards, not the modern media teams trying to reshape the court into a celebrity platform. The visual proof of this internal isolation became undeniable by noon. Camilla's media team was forced to utilize a standard commercial delivery service to transport their promotional materials to the London fashion venue, as no palace vans were made available for the journey. The sight of a regular courier van unloading boxes outside a royal event was a massive public relations embarrassment for the Queen's inner circle. The National Press Corps immediately began asking why the Standard Royal Transport Corps had completely abandoned the project, forcing the palace press office to issue a clunky statement about temporary vehicle maintenance checks. The tension within the palace corridors remains incredibly thick as the staff members continue to execute their daily routines with total mechanical silence. They are fully aware that a major domestic war is playing out behind the closed doors of the private apartments. Yet, by choosing to side completely with the Princess Royal, the workers have drawn their own line in the sand. They have proven that within the ancient walls of Buckingham Palace, true authority is earned through decades of shared duty and mutual respect. And no amount of ceremonial rank can easily overturn the loyalty of the crown's traditional guard. The terrifying ultimatum issued to Clarence House. The private secretary to the king stood outside the heavy double doors of the private apartments at Clarence House at exactly 6 o'clock on Tuesday evening. In his right hand, he held a dark green leather folder containing a 2-page document known as a Sovereign Operational Restraint Order. The hallway was entirely empty, as all household footmen had been ordered to clear the floor 30 minutes prior. From inside the room, the distinct sound of raised voices carried through the thick oak panels, followed by the heavy thud of a silver candlestick being placed aggressively onto a marble console table. The confrontation inside the room was the most severe domestic crisis King Charles had faced since his accession to the throne. Queen Camilla stood by the large mahogany writing desk, her face tight with anger, as she reviewed the terms of the document the secretary had just delivered. Charles sat in his wingback chair near the window, his hands resting firmly on the arms of the seat. He did not look up at his wife, as she demanded that he immediately cancel the paperwork and terminate the employment of the master of the household, who had recorded her briefing room comments. The structural facts of the restriction order reveal a brutal display of sovereign discipline that has no modern parallel in the history of the court. Under the strict terms of the document, Camilla's independent scheduling authority was completely suspended for a period of 30 days. The text explicitly commanded her private media directors to submit all future public relations calendars, travel manifests, and interview requests to the king's personal private secretary for a formal veto review before any public commitments could be finalized. Furthermore, the document ordered the immediate cancellation of her high-profile London fashion charity appearance, citing a mandatory phase of administrative fiscal consolidation. The tension in the room escalated to a terrifying level when Camilla refused to pick up the fountain pen to initialize the document. She argued that signing the restriction order would be a public admission of defeat that would permanently destroy her standing among the international design houses and cultural organizations she has spent years cultivating. She pointed out that Princess Anne's quiet railway journey to Scotland was already being utilized by the national newspapers to portray her own office as an unnecessary luxury. Signing the king's directive would validate those press attacks, reducing her role to a secondary ceremonial figure with zero independent influence over the public image of the monarchy. Charles responded by delivering a cold, unyielding ultimatum that left the queen consort entirely without room to maneuver. He stated that if she refused to sign the operational restraint order before midnight, he would instruct the Treasury solicitors to initiate a formal review of the sovereign grant allocations for her personal household staff. He was entirely prepared to dismantle her independent public relations department by cutting off their funding line through a direct royal warrant. The king made it clear that he would not tolerate an internal administrative rebellion that threatened the stability of his sister's long-term management of the estate. The legal reality of the 1937 protocol meant that Camilla had absolutely no constitutional leverage to fight back against the threat. A queen consort holds no independent constitutional office under British law. Her public position, her staff budget, and her access to the crown's private transport assets exist solely by virtue of the reigning monarch's personal approval. If Charles chose to enforce a complete 30-day media exile, her public relations team would be legally barred from issuing any press statements or scheduling any public appearances without facing an immediate charge of corporate insubordination. The physical reality of this total defeat settled over the private sitting room as the clock on the mantelpiece struck 7 o'clock. Camilla realized that the Central Palace apparatus had completely closed ranks against her. Prince William's public support of Princess Anne had effectively combined the financial power of the Duchy of Cornwall with the traditional authority of the king, leaving her office completely isolated within the geography of the palace. She picked up the fountain pen from the desk tray, pressed the nib against the parchment, and signed her initials to the bottom of both pages of the restriction order. The private secretary was called back into the room at 7:15 to collect the finalized paperwork. The atmosphere inside the apartment was completely frozen, with both the king and queen sitting in absolute silence as the document was locked back inside the green leather folder. The signed order was immediately transferred to the secure archives beneath the building via an armed security courier, closing the door on the most volatile domestic showdown of the reign and leaving the queen consort's inner circle to face the reality of a court where their independent power had just been completely dismantled. A monarchy fractured at the top. The official calendar modification logs were pulled up on a high-definition monitor inside the Buckingham Palace administrative suite at precisely 8 o'clock on Wednesday morning. A senior IT technician, acting under a direct security warrant from the king's private secretary, began systematically changing the access permissions for the queen consort's staff. With a few clicks of a mouse, the digital calendar sync lines between Camilla's Mayfair office and the Central Palace travel registry were permanently severed. The screen flashed a final confirmation message across the terminal, access restricted by sovereign decree. The factual data resulting from this administrative lockdown quickly trickled down to the national media desks across London. By noon, the official online schedule of the royal family had been completely overhauled. The high-profile London fashion show that Camilla had spent 6 months organizing was officially marked with a bold red strikeout line reading, "Cancelled due to administrative restructuring." At the exact same moment, Princess Anne's ongoing tour of the Scottish Highlands was expanded by 3 additional stops, with the travel registry automatically restoring her priority access to the palace's private helicopter fleet for the remainder of the month. The physical reality of this sudden shift in power created immense palpable tension among the courtiers walking the long corridors of the palace. Senior press officers spent the afternoon huddled in emergency meetings, trying to construct a cohesive public relations narrative to explain why the Queen Consort had suddenly vanished from the public eye. The official statement issued to the press pack was a masterpiece of clunky palace diplomacy, claiming that temporary vehicle maintenance audits had forced a minor consolidation of the autumn calendar. Nobody in the media room believed the explanation. The front pages of the evening papers were already carrying images of Princess Anne's silent, triumphant railway journey through the north. The situation introduces an interesting historical mystery regarding the long-term living arrangements inside the private apartments of Clarence House. Several long-serving housemaids noted that the domestic staff had been instructed to divide the morning laundry and wardrobe allocations into two entirely separate sectors of the building. The king's personal items remained in the primary state apartments, while Camilla's belongings were quietly transferred to a secondary guest wing facing the inner courtyard. This physical separation within the home proves that the fallout from the briefing room altercation was not just a brief bureaucratic dispute. It had fundamentally fractured the domestic peace of the royal marriage itself. This internal isolation was further intensified when the financial clerks completed their review of the sovereign grant discretionary fund logs on Thursday afternoon. They discovered that the king had signed an additional warrant transferring £25,000 from the central entertainment budget directly to Princess Anne's maritime charity foundations in Scotland. This was a direct financial replication of the visual victory Anne had secured on the public train lines. Charles was using the crown's private wealth to publicly validate his sister's traditional standards of duty, leaving his wife's office entirely defunded and powerless to launch any parallel media campaigns. The long-term resolution of this crisis proves that within the ancient walls of the British monarchy, the traditional code of quiet, unflash of duty will always triumph over modern celebrity strategy. Camilla's attempt to use her ceremonial rank to humiliate the hardest working member of the family had completely backfired, resulting in a swift, devastating application of sovereign discipline that stripped away her independent influence. The Prince of Wales's immediate intervention from Adelaide Cottage had solidified this outcome, ensuring that the future court remains firmly aligned with the traditional values maintained by the older guard. King Charles had successfully restored administrative order to his household, but the silence inside his private study remained a permanent reminder of a crown fractured at the very top. The ultimate battle for control inside Buckingham Palace has just exploded behind closed doors, leaving the royal household completely shaken. Queen Camilla tried to humiliate Princess Royal Anne in front of the palace staff, but King Charles's furious reaction has permanently rewritten the rules of the court. This unprecedented domestic rift proves that the family's internal power struggles are far from over, and the future king is already backing the traditional guard. What is your immediate reaction to the king's brutal decision to punish Camilla? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below. To stay ahead of every major royal update and exclusive media analysis, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell right now.